Hi guys, George here from Zero Period Productions, and today we're taking a look at the Arcanist, the new class being added in the upcoming Necrom chapter for the Elder Scrolls Online. Many players have been asking for a new class for years now, our last one being the Necromancer in 2019, added with the Elsewhere chapter. Arcanist will be the 7th playable class in-game, drawing inspiration from the daedric Prince of Knowledge Hermaeus Mora, who plays a major role in this year's expansion. I first tried out Arcanist a little earlier this year, and then a second time during the ESO Las Vegas community event, and again most recently on the playtest server on PC. None of these 3 builds are the final one, and while the version we're playing now on the PTS is the most current, there will still be changes from what we're seeing right now to what we can expect at the official launch in June. I'm really enjoying the class though. At this point, I have maybe 10 or so hours of fooling around with it, and it feels really good. Abilities are fun, the animations stand out as being more unique and higher quality, the sound design is fantastic. Personally, with a few more tweaks and changes, I think this could easily become my new main class. If anything, after the first preview event that I took part in, I just sat here thinking, man, now I have to wait till June to really get to play this. The Arcanist draws power from mystical runes, ancient tomes of knowledge, and from the realm of Apocrypha itself. Their eerie green powers help to reflect this from their use of a tome similar in appearance to Mora's Black Books, and abilities that spew tendrils at your enemies. The Arcanist deals with 3 different types of damage: physical, magic, and frost. Early on in development, the devs had considered creating a brand new Oblivion damage type for the class, but for balancing purposes ultimately decided on Frost being the better choice. Frost damage won't be as much of a focal point for Arcanist as it is for, say, the Warden class. Rather, it serves as a bonus damage type for certain abilities and their morphs. There are several aspects to the Arcanist that help it stand out, including an ability named Apocryphal Gate, which allows for players to create 2 portals to allow for short-range teleportation. In addition to this, Arcanists make use of a new system called Crux. When casting certain class skills, you'll generate Crux points. These points can be stacked and saved up while in combat to a maximum of 3. With any amount of Crux saved up, you can make use of a skill impacted by it, which will give said skill some extra oomph to make it more powerful and more effective. This essentially acts as a bit of a combo and buff system to get some extra mileage out of your class skills. In order to keep track of how much Crux you have at any point, look for the little triangular runes circling your character. Each of these floating runes indicates 1 Crux point. 3 runes, 3 Crux points. You get the idea. To give an idea of how Crux works and how important it will be for the class, we'll take a look at 2 different active abilities. One which generates Crux and another which uses it. Runeblades and its morphs will serve as a great spammable ability for damage dealers, and during my playtime served as my primary means of building Crux. With each use of Runeblades, you'll see that I gain 1 rune above my character. One thing to note is that Crux can only be generated while in combat, so you can't try to stack up Crux prior to an encounter. With each additional Crux stacked on your character, Runeblades will deal an additional 3% damage. After 3 casts of Runeblades, I have maxed out my Crux, giving me 9% extra damage with this ability should I keep using it. Instead, however, we're gonna make use of Fate Carver, in which you channel a beam of damage for several seconds, dealing magicka damage and getting increased damage for however much Crux you have at the time of using it. I'm intentionally not doing much of a deep dive into a lot of numbers here since we're currently on the playtest server, and while these numbers are public, this build is still probably a few weeks old and won't be indicative of the final balancing when the expansion releases. Just for the sake of comparison though, on the current PTS build, consuming Crux with Fate Carver increases damage by 33% and decreases cost by 13% per Crux spent. So even if these numbers do get brought down a little bit for the final release, it really shows how much of a difference it makes to cast this one ability once you've maxed out that Crux. Like the other player classes in ESO, Arcanist has 3 skill lines: the Herald of the Tome, Apocryphal Soldier, and Curative Rune Forms, which serve as your offense, defense, and support skill lines respectively. One of the big things about ESO is that you can play any class as any role: Stamina or Magicka DPS, Tank, or Healer, and that you can play as any race for any of these roles as well. There's always more optimal combinations for these, but ultimately, you're going to be able to play the vast majority of content in the game with any role and race combination. With more recent combat changes to the game, the devs have leaned in more on hybridization, meaning that players can do a little bit more of a mix of magicka and stamina, rather than having to lean in almost exclusively to one or the other. With Arcanist, I can see this move to hybridization working well, giving players the ability to really build their character the way that works for them. With Arcanist and several of its abilities, the skills simply use whichever of your resources is higher: magicka or stamina. In the past, different abilities and their morphs would use one specific resource, making for some more limitation in builds, preventing you from really using certain abilities a lot, depending on how you slotted your attribute points. I'd love to see some of the older classes get this change for certain skills, as I think it could really open up some new playstyles. That being said, this is not the case for all Arcanist abilities. Some of them are still specifically mag or stam. I won't be going super in-depth for every skill for Arcanist, but I will touch on some of my personal favorites from my time playing. Mostly pertains to damage dealing, as well as a little bit of the support line. If you're interested in seeing a more detailed list of all the class abilities, both active and passive, as well as ultimates, I recommend ESO U's in-depth write-up. I'll leave a link in the description below so you can check it out for yourself. We've already touched slightly on Runeblades and Fate Carver, and 2 of the abilities in Herald of the Tome, our damage dealing skill line. In addition to these, we also have Abyssal Impact, in which you shoot inky black tentacles out of your arm. Enemies become immobilized and are marked with abyssal ink, which grants you increased damage to any enemies affected by this debuff. One of the morphs for Abyssal Impact, Tentacular Dread, was the morph that I used the most, increasing that bonus damage and duration of immobilization. The other morph for Abyssal Impact does turn the ability into an execute, dealing extra damage to enemies under 50% health. That being said, this morph also turns the ability into a stamina one, and for right now at least, I've largely been focused on magicka abilities while testing. Another ability that I really enjoyed under this skill line was Tome Bearer's Inspiration, in which you etch a series of runes onto your weapon. While the ability is active, your weapon pulses with power, and enhances your class abilities for its duration. Striking an enemy with the class ability will then deal additional magic damage, and will generate crux if you don't already have any. Having this slotted on either ability bar will also grant you major brutality and major sorcery, increasing weapon and spell damage. The ultimate ability under Herald of the Tome is named the Unblinking Eye, a beam-based ability in which a scion of Hermaeus Mora casts a long, uninterrupted beam of energy that rends asunder reality, dealing magicka damage to enemies within range every few seconds. I found this to be a really fun ultimate. I liked the longer uptime, and that you were able to use other skills, drink potions, move around, and so on while it was active. For Apocryphal Soldier, which serves as our defense line, I really only made use of one ability so far. Sorry, tanking is not my forte, so I'm not going to sit here and pretend to know what I'm talking about for its skill line. The skill that I made use of here was Fate Woven Armor, a self-buff granting you major resolve and increasing your armor for the duration of the skill. While the armor is up, taking damage applies a minor breach, and reduces the armor of your attacker. For me, this served as a decent self-buff, and coupled with its second morph, Unbreakable Fate, which grants block mitigation, major resolve, and on cast consumes crux to gain additional block mitigation for each crux spent. This worked pretty well for me during my time playtesting, since I was really only using 1 or 2 other skills that used up crux at all. While I'm not sure how other players will want to make use of crux, I personally found that I preferred having more abilities that generated crux, and maybe only 2 or 3 that actually consumed it. In this case, I kept Fate Weaver as 1, Abyssal Impact as the 2nd, and Fate Woven Armor as my 3rd, and splitting them up between my front bar and back bar so that they weren't all together. Under Curative Rune Forms, the healing skill line, I made use of a couple different skills, namely Rune Mend, which allows you to cast apocryphal runes using them to heal yourself or an ally in front of you. The runes heal you a few times and generate crux. For each active crux, Rune Mend will cost less to cast again. During my time testing, this served as my primary self-heal. And the one ability that everyone's been talking about since it was first shown off, Apocryphal Gate, aka Teleport Time. Casting this ability allows you to place a portal at a target location. Stepping through either portal will teleport you to its twin, and this can be repeated for as long as the gates remain open. There is a somewhat limited range in how far you can place Apocryphal Gate, but this is probably for the best balancing-wise, especially when it comes to PvP. But as a damage dealer, I don't see myself having it slotted often. Maybe for solo arenas, but ultimately, I think it'll have a better place on a healer's ability bar. I'm someone who focuses much more on PvE gameplay. PvP just isn't my personal cup of tea. One concern with the new class being added is that it might just steamroll everything else in PvP at launch. It was an issue we ran into with the Necromancer class back in 2019, and even at its launch, the devs acknowledged that it might be a little overtuned for that first patch or so. Having spoken with a few friends who specialize a bit more in PvP, right now they don't have the same concerns for Arcanist. If anything, they're actually a little worried right now that it might be slightly undertuned for Battlegrounds and Cyrodiil, just based on some of their time playing the class on PTS. This is all still based on the first week of the PTS being up, and we have more than a month from now till the launch of the expansion, giving the devs ample time to hopefully bump up the numbers a little bit, just to bring it more in line with the other classes performance-wise. If anything, this kinda surprised me. I think a lot of us are used to the newest class being one of the best things to play for PvP at launch. It's why I played Necro so much in Battlegrounds when it first came out, because I could actually hold my own against some better players for a change. In terms of PvE content, I think Arcanist is going to make for really good support characters, but DPS-focused players such as myself will definitely get a big kick out of it too. My main critique with the Arcanist is that in its current state, I don't know if it has enough survivability for solo play, namely that it's missing the same kind of passive and self-heal from damage-dealing abilities that a lot of other classes benefit from. Templars have Jabs, Necromancers have Death Scythe, Nightblade has Swallow Soul, Dragon Knight has Burning Embers. While there are dedicated self-heals for the Arcanist overall, we don't have a good damage-dealing ability that also provides some form of healing, and I think this will be a really significant problem for new players who are dropping in with Necrom and are playing Arcanist as their first class ever. My personal thoughts on how to fix this would be to change up some of the current skills under Herald of the Tome. I would maybe want to see Abyssal Impact and its morphs provide some kind of healing over time. Make it so that when you first apply the Abyssal Ink debuff to an enemy, you get a burst heal, followed by some sort of healing over time as the debuff lingers. At this point, we could then take the Execute off of Abyssal Impact's morph, and maybe move that over to Fate Carver instead, turning that into the class's designated Execute ability. In regards to Crux, as a damage dealer, I'm currently happy with the implementation of it. I've been watching different videos, reading different articles, and have seen some mixed impressions. One recurring opinion that I've seen is the concern that there might not be enough skills that act as Crux spenders. Once again, this is me speaking strictly as someone focused on DPS. I kinda prefer it the way that it is right now. Building Crux is easy, especially with a spammable ability like Runeblades, and there's bonuses to continue to use Runeblades with max Crux anyway. To me, it almost feels like Crux is there to be a bonus component to Arcanist, as a means of getting some extra utility out of your abilities, rather than it being a mad dash to make sure you spend those 3 stacks of Crux the second that you have them. Still, we have some time before the launch, and hopefully that gives the devs plenty of time to address these concerns, comments, and critiques. At the start of the video, I mentioned being able to attend the recent ESO 2023 celebration in Las Vegas. During this event, the team talked about how they first started work on the class more than 2 years ago, and at the time, they didn't know for sure that it would be focused around the aesthetic of Hermaeus Mora. I definitely think this was a good call though. The creepy, eerie, green and black abilities, the cosmic horror, and mystical beams of light really helped to make this class stand out as being very unique. The Crux minigame isn't anything completely brand new, but I think it's really fun, and different morphs can turn an ability into Crux builders or spenders, making for more and more variety in how people use this new mechanic and set up their builds. Arcanist will be available to everyone who purchases a copy of the Necrom chapter for the Elder Scrolls Online, which releases June 5th for PC and Mac, and June 20th for Xbox One, Series S and X, and PS4 and 5. New classes usually become available for standalone purchase a year after release, but until then it'll only be available with the expansion itself. It's also worth noting that if you've already filled up all of your character slots, buying Necrom will grant you a free slot so you can make an Arcanist. Or any other class. I'm just not sure why you would do that if you bought Necrom in the first place. All of the gameplay you've seen here today has been recorded on the PC playtest server, meaning that some things are subject to change for the official launch. This includes damage numbers, skill names, and different synergies. Still, I imagine a lot of the information in this video will stay accurate at release and beyond. And while Necrom's launch is still a little while away, I plan on releasing a couple more videos on it leading up to its release. We have new cities to explore, characters to meet, and loot to, well, loot. I'll be making an Arcanist when Necrom launches, and will be streaming my experience with the new expansion and more over at twitch.tv/0periodproductions. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.